All right, so thanks everyone for joining us today. We have Roberto Almeida and Andrew Landy on the phone with us from the health unit. They joined us before and gave us some great advice regarding how to handle safety protocol during a pandemic. Now that we've moved into phase 3 and we also have a mask directive in place, we thought it would be worthwhile having a conversation with them again so they can explain how we can deal with these directives in a safe and compliant way. I know that I have a lot of questions about it, and it's been great to have the conversations with both Roberto and Andy over the past 2 weeks. The biggest concern, of course, for us was we walked into starting an event that was compliant with phase 1, and all of a sudden we had to deal with a mask directive that we weren't expecting. So we had some good conversations around that. And I certainly hear from many of our members some of the challenges that they have in terms of being compliant. So we're hoping that this conversation will help with that. Roberto will go through some of the specific directives that are in place and try to give some explanation around what they mean out of the gate. But then I think we all have some individual situations that we're trying to get clarity on and looking forward to bringing those forward as well. Just to frame that a little bit, we all know that we have policy and procedure and protocol in place for a number of different things. Anybody who's involved with health and safety, anybody who's involved with employees, we always have that there. But it's not until you come into a situation where there's been an adverse event where somebody didn't follow that policy or protocol that then you realize why it was in place. And so I think making some of this real so that we don't experience the situation that they had in Kingston, for example, with their outbreak a couple weeks ago. And you look at what kind of protocol should have been in place at that time and where did that fail or what happened to make that situation erupt, because we do not want to be that community that ends up having an outbreak because somebody didn't follow the rules or because they didn't believe or understand how they should have been applied. So Roberto, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you go.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks for the introduction, and as well, thank you for everybody who's joining in today. Unfortunately, Andrew and I can't join you via video, but we're here on a voice link. Just starting off with a general overview of the current situation in our area. As Jill mentioned, we are in stage 3 of the province's reopening. That took effect at midnight on July the 17th, so we're 5 days in regards to that. The number of cases in our area remains at 43. I think last time we met, so that was the same tally we had. There's been no new cases since May 18th. The number of tests conducted in our area has gone up significantly. I think we're up to 15,500. And internally, our intake line here at Hastings Prince Edward Public Health has answered 4,000 inquiries, and we've conducted 4,000, around the same number of assessments. Out of those 4,000 assessments, we've issued quarantine self-isolation orders for 2,100 people, and that's been a major prevention measure that's helped contain the outbreak in our area. Early on, when swabbing and testing was not fully accessible, we switched gears and we early on started confining people who were probable cases to stay home for 14 days until they test positive or were 24 hours clear of symptoms. Internally, recently, as Jill mentioned, we issued a mask directive that took effect on July 10th and then was updated on July 17th to align with the stage 3 status for our area. We've also just yesterday refreshed some of our fact sheets that we have issued previously for food establishments, grocery stores and big box discount stores. Those were initially issued in April, and we refreshed them now to reflect the current reality. We also updated our washroom requirements fact sheet and updated the cleaning and disinfecting frequency in that. And we issued a new enclosed spaces fact sheet that replaces one that we did early on for hardware stores and retail stores and garden centers, which were allowed to open under stage 2. So that's kind of where we are currently. To set the stage, I guess, for further discussion later on, just wanted to mention that there's a number of regulations and acts in play here that apply to COVID-19. One is the Occupational Health and Safety Regulations and the Act. As well, there's the Emergency Measures and Civil Protection Act, which up until March of this year, probably myself included, never heard about. But that's the piece of legislation that the provincial government can declare an emergency under and issue emergency regulations and directives. And as well, there's the Public Health Act, what we used to be called the Public Health Act until 20, 30 years ago. That's now called the Health Protection and Promotion Act. And that gives authority for medical officers of health and public health inspectors to handle and curtail infection diseases and outbreaks. So as you may recall, on April the 9th, we issued a Section 22 order that applied to people who were probable and confirmed cases of COVID, which then required them to self-isolate for 14 days. At the moment, our strategy is containment. As Jill and I and Andrew were talking earlier before the call started, we can't prevent every single case, but if we become aware of a case, our case management team and our inspection staff, their main task is to contain that and make sure that that one case does not spread the virus to a large number of people. So that's where we are. In terms of the Stage 3 regulations, if we can move on to that, Stage 3 took effect last Friday. As a result of that, indoor dining in restaurants and bars can now take place, provided there's a number of parameters in place. So, for example, no buffet-style service may be provided. Patrons must be seated while eating or drinking at the establishment. The establishment must be configured so that patrons seated at different tables are separated by at least 2 meters or plexiglass or some other barrier. No person shall dance, sing, or perform music at the establishments unless in accordance with Section 2 and 3. So what does that mean? What that means is that an establishment can hire a performer, provided they meet a set of parameters later on in the regulation that stipulates what has to happen in live performance. Members of the public or dining guests can also dance and sing, and they have to follow similar parameters. Food courts in malls and elsewhere can open provided social distancing is possible or a physical barrier is used. Fitting rooms in a business may open if patrons are not permitted to occupy adjacent fitting room stalls at the same time. Movie theaters, cinemas may open if the total number of members of the public permitted in the venue can maintain social distance, but they cannot exceed 50 people in the same theater. Going on as well, casinos, bingo halls, and other gaming establishments may open if they comply with the following conditions. Table games are not allowed in casinos, for example. Social distancing must be adhered to. And in any event, you cannot exceed 50 persons at one time in the same room. Campgrounds may open if the person responsible for the campground ensures that every person using the campground is complying with social distancing, if there's any gatherings or organized public events. And then there's a major section around gatherings. The general rules is that gatherings have been increased to 50 people indoors, 100 outdoors. There's a number of exemptions. For example, day camps children's day camps are exempt from this if there's social distances in place, and as well the drive-in theaters providing concerts or just showing movies can exceed this if the clients or the customers stay in their car unless to go to the bathroom or to get food. So that's kind of where we are with the regulations. There were a number of questions. I'll pause at that point and then see whether, Andrew, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, that sounds like a good intro, and I can kind of field questions.
Okay. There were a number that came in that we can go to those now, Jill, if that's okay with you.
Sure. So now I gave you a list. Do you want me just to kind of preamble those a little bit?
Sure, that would be great. So I don't
Okay.
have to talk.
So we did receive a few questions, and some of these people aren't actually even on the call, but because it's being recorded, we certainly wanted to have them asked. So this is from a catering, and most of these are from kind of restaurant dining things, because that is probably the most engaging experience that people are going to be involved with in groups, and where we can see some of the challenges around social distancing and, of course, mask wearing. So when it comes to catering for events, weddings, cocktail receptions, luncheons, etc., what are the guidelines to follow? What can we not do? What are the penalties involved in not abiding by regulations for both indoor and outdoor catering? Actually, that's packed up quite a bit. Maybe let's talk a little bit about how the penalty thing works, because that probably preambles everything. And when we had our very first conversation, when the mask directive came out, it seemed to emphasize this whole concept of fines that could, go up to $10 million for a corporation. And you assured me then that education was the goal, not fining. So maybe you can tell me how that happens.
Yeah, great question. And in terms of enforcement, we always publish the maximum fines in the Act. That's done, by us and other enforcement agencies to get, compliance, general deterrence, as we call it. When it comes to actual proceedings under the Act, there's a couple ways to do it. One is to issue a ticket. And the Ministry of the Solicitor General has given us a table to use. A ticket under the Emergency Measures and Civil Protection Act. There's two levels. One is for general non-compliance, and that's $750 plus victim surcharge, so it's $880. There's a second option, which is for obstruction of an officer, so whether it be by law, a health inspector, or the police. And I think the fine is a little bit higher. I think it's $1,000 plus victim surcharge. That said, we operate under a progressive enforcement model, which we've been using for many years, and that was reinforced when the EMCPA was evoked. So that means we go out, we educate, we talk to operators and other individuals. We then, if there's non-compliance, we give time for compliance to take place. If we re-inspect or revisit, then we may move to a sterner fashion of education, which would be like a verbal warning. And then the last layer is the ticketing and under the Act. But to date, we haven't issued any tickets in our area. I know Toronto and some of the other health units and municipalities have done so. I know Brampton has issued some tickets, Toronto as well. But we're pretty committed to that progressive enforcement model, and it'd be hard to envision where we would resort to a ticket. In terms of the question about gatherings, if it's indoors, the space where the public and the employees interface, that comes under our mask directive. Masks, according to our medical officer of health, both past and present, are 1/5 of the recipe. The other 4 parts are hand washing, screening sick staff and sick patrons so that they don't come into the venue and actually go home and contact us for an assessment. As well, cleaning and disinfecting of the venue, common contact surfaces and objects that are touched, and then social distancing as much as possible, or using a barrier. So if those things are, being done, then the adverse event that you mentioned earlier in the call, should be avoided, and transmission should be avoided. I hope that answers the question.
Sure. And there are a couple more questions coming in too. There is the question about anything in place to protect servers and management against losing their job if they feel that they are not safe. The venue is not up to code in regards to PPE and refuse to work until these requirements are met. And we see both sides of this, and then of course that we could even have a conversation about the individual who refuses to wear a mask. Can the business refuse service? How does that work? But so is that more of a Ministry of Labor situation?
Yeah, that was where I was going to take that or go with that. The Occupational Health and Safety Act is still in place. In fact, when the government issues these various Stage 2, Stage 3 regulations, they always make reference to the Occupational Health and Safety Act in those regulations to say that it still applies. So if a worker is feeling that their workplace, there's some aspect of their workplace is not safe, then they can call the Ministry of Labor and ask questions or file a complaint. And the Ministry of Labor has inspectors that will respond to those. In fact, they've gone out and contracted some staff from other agencies that normally don't do this type of work because they've been swamped with complaints lately. There's always the refusal to work section of the Act that can be triggered by an employee and then requires an inspector to come on site and determine whether the actual refusal is legitimate. But hopefully by calling and asking questions or filing a complaint, it doesn't have to escalate that far.
And even
Right,
before
and
that
think,
sorry,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, even before that, the employee that's questioning it if there's a joint health and safety committee internally, they should try that first before going to the Ministry of Labor.
Yes, good point.
Yeah, very good point. And I think you also, when we talked earlier, mentioned that the Ministry of Labor has kind of a 1-800 number. Employers are probably welcome and encouraged to call in advance and ask for that consultation with regard to whether or not they are managing and safety protocol effectively and whether or not they're being compliant before anybody complains, I guess.
Yeah, and that was the strong impression I got from speaking with one of their staff recently that works out of the Kingston office, that they do welcome questions from employers and employees alike. If there's any need for clarity or clarification on any aspect of their health and safety regime. It's similar to the health unit. I think we are very, we were pleased when people call us to ask questions about a situation before, we get a complaint or we find out that something is not in compliance. I think the same applies for them.
Right. There was another question with the gathering limit of 100 for outside events where you can observe social distancing, etc. Does that include the people hired for the event? So bartenders, caterers, photographers?
Yeah, we're going on the basis that it does not. There's language in the Stage 3 framework document that the government issued that appears to not include the staff.
Right, because they are kind of unto themselves and not necessarily mingling with the public the same way.
Correct.
And so another question, and I've had this a couple of times, do kitchen staff need to wear masks?
So, great question. Currently, our mask directive does not apply to private or say back of the house activities. It only applies to enclosed public spaces where there's interaction between staff and the public, where a service or good exchange of goods takes place. But under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Ministry of Labor and their staff may require, depending on the circumstances. So
Right.
that's kind of the long and short of it.
Yeah.
If there's a complaint or a call and the inspector makes a determination and issues an order under that act, they might require.
Right. That makes sense.
I think in speaking with the staff person from Kingston again, they have been fielding these types of complaints. They did have one that dealt with face shields and masks that went to the tribunal for appeal, and so they are getting these calls. But right now, does not fall under our mask directive. Now, there's other scenarios under the Act, the Emergency Management Act, that does require face covering. So, not in restaurants per se, but if someone is accessing a personal care service, like going into a hair salon, getting their nails done, or tattoo, accessing a tattoo artist, then that is explicitly stated in the Act and in the regulation, but not for back of the house workplaces.
Right. Okay. So that's good. And I guess it all depends on kind of the interaction between the front of house staff and the back of house staff as well. And
yeah,
your front of house staff would always have their mask, whether they're going into the back of house or not, because they're the ones who are kind of coming in contact.
Yeah, we would recommend to keep it on just to avoid contaminating, the mask, making the mask dirty, or touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with unclean hands.
Right. So, and when we talk, so here's another, and that's another good question. You have your front of house and your back of house. In an environment like the log cabin, I'll use this as an example, our staff are protected by plexiglass because they may have to have a fairly close interaction with a customer where they're referring to a map. So they have a physical piece of paper that they want to both look at. So that's why we've created an environment where they're protected by the plexiglass versus necessarily wearing a mask. Anybody coming into the building is expected to wear one. Where I'm in my office upstairs, if somebody, and we've now designated these as employee only areas, if someone comes up to my office, invited of course, do I have to wear a mask when they come if I can physically distance from them?
It's not covered under our mask directive, but if you've passed the policy, or if the Ministry of Labor said you have to, then you'd have to follow that stronger direction. But currently, the directive that Dr. Cattery issued on July 10th and 17th does not require that.
Okay. And I guess the other thing is if you're with someone that you know is local, is dealing with the same kind of risk in terms of community spread, then you can kind of make that judgment call, I guess. Are we left to our own common sense in that application?
In terms of meeting in the private area of the workplace?
Yeah.
I would say, going back to the 5 tenets of prevention, if you're offering a safe workplace that's been cleaned and sanitized, and there's hand washing facilities available nearby, and if you're practicing social distance, absent a house policy on your end and direction from the Ministry of Labor, I think you're okay.
Fair enough. So there's another question around the logic behind not allowing adjacent change rooms to be used. If they are separate stalls, people are automatically abiding by physical distancing rules.
Great question. Andrew and I had an off the record, or off.
It's on the record now.
Offline. In between meetings with you and this call, we were like thinking about that and talking about it. Andrew, I think you summarized it pretty good in terms of the regulations and what these do.
Yeah, you can't always find logic, so we won't spend too much time looking for that in everything. And at a certain point, you just have to go exactly with what the regulation currently states. And I don't have that in front of me right this second. I saw that.
Yeah, and Andrew is correct. The stage 2 regulations talked about using every second fitting room and not using one that had like cloth instead of wood partitions, and that was taken out of stage 3 for whatever reason, but they're still going with every second fitting room.
Yeah, you've probably already read it, but it just says simply fitting rooms in a business may open if patrons are not permitted to occupy adjacent fitting room stalls at any one time. So
Okay.
pretty clear, maybe not logical, but that's what it says.
Okay, so
I
I
think
mean,
it
I
goes
guess
back
that's
to
an
your
appeal
comment.
at some point, right? If we want to advocate for, you know, extension of that, where does the logic come from?
Well, and that's a great comment. Like throughout all of this, one of the things that Andrew and I have been communicating with our staff is that you come across a situation where there's very little wiggle room. The regulation says A, B, and C, just like Andrew described. We explain that to the public and the operator, but we also tell our staff that they have the right to contact their MPP and ask for some different language that makes more sense or provides more clarification. So I think that's happened in a couple of cases. Going back to stage 1 and 2, there's been instances where local concerns have been brought to the cabinet table and changes might have been made as a result, but that's something that we emphasize.
Okay, thank you. That's good. So I'm hoping that answers the question for our anonymous attendee. We also had something, gyms require, now that gyms are opening, do masks have to be worn while working out?
I don't believe so. I think in our FAQ, it talks about that on our website. So if you're participating in exercise class or...
Yeah, I think the focus for the mask in the gyms was perhaps while you're on the piece of equipment, working hard, breathing heavy, no, you don't need to have the mask on. But if you're moving from that piece of equipment to another piece of equipment, or going to the washroom, that kind of idea, walking around other people, then the request was that they should have a mask on.
Theory or the logic behind that being that you can sanitize the piece of equipment when you leave it. And so if you did breathe on it, then hopefully you've used another of the 5 stages to kind of fix that issue.
Yeah, you know, when you're walking around, you're coming into contact with other people. You're coming into their bubble zone kind of thing. And perhaps you can't wear a mask, just physically cannot, if you're exerting yourself enough that you're just not getting enough air through a thick mask kind of idea. So, you know, it's a bit of a health and safety issue at that point for the user.
Fair enough. And certainly that seems to be part of the problem for many people. Public restrooms at restaurants, are they mandated to open them? And so people were denied using the restroom at an establishment, and the understanding of this person was that if food is provided as a dine-in or patio option, washrooms must be made available.
So throughout this, one of the things that happened, which caused us, made us pause and think about it, was the closure of bathrooms and the detrimental effects of that, for people not having access to facilities and not being able to wash hands properly. So we issued those fact sheets that I mentioned earlier. One was about public washrooms. We're trying to encourage public washrooms to stay open or reopen. In the case of the indoor dining situation, the Act says that you can access indoor dining now. It's silent on washrooms, except in other situations where, like I mentioned, drive-in, if they're having a concert or showing a movie. But the food premises regulations of Ontario, which is what our health inspectors use when they do a routine inspection, still are in effect. And in there, it says you can't reduce the number of facilities without the approval of the health inspector. So under normal times, pre-COVID and still now, the municipality approves the number of bathrooms for when they approve business application. But the health inspector has some oversight as to when the operator wants to reduce access. So we would encourage at this time, if the dining rooms are being open or patios, that washrooms be available.
That's an interesting point, because now I know there are some with patios that actually brought in portable toilets to kind of manage that, which I suppose would be appropriate and also easier to clean, because now you're not going inside the building at all. But certainly with dine-in, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. And and it's, again, speaking to the challenge of businesses trying to reopen with all these protocol in place and being able to have the staff that could go in and sanitize the bathrooms on a regular basis. I mean, certainly as an individual, you have to decide that that may be putting you at greater risk because you don't know if they've been sanitized effectively in between use. So you kind of think about it that way too, I suppose.
Yeah, our first draft of the bathroom requirements was very strict on cleaning and disinfecting frequency. We've loosened that up to give the operator more say. It says we've put it down as needed or required to maintain a sanitary condition. The use of the bathroom, the patrons using the bathroom, they will be required to wear masks when they go to the bathroom, and you know, hopefully the premise is in sanitary condition, and they're also washing hands as they're leaving, which is sort of the last barrier against infection. But like you said, portable toilets are acceptable as well. You'll see those being used by some operators, and that's fine. When playgrounds became open as part of this round of opening, stage 3, a lot of the municipalities were wondering about a cleaning and disinfecting frequency for playgrounds, and we just stated back that it's not a practical environment for that sort of thing, but we encourage washrooms nearby to be open. So playgrounds right now are, you know, some of the prevention strategies are posting signs, encouraging social distancing, but washing hands frequently. And for that to happen, you need the facility.
Right, right. And we certainly don't want them going somewhere else.
Correct.
Well, that creates I mean, I think if, you know, you've got your kid who has to go to the bathroom, they can't necessarily hold it, so they're going to go somewhere. Anyway, that is what it is. There's so another good question here, and I guess maybe they're asking for reasoning and logic again, but to your point that there may or may not be logic, but maybe you could describe what is the adverse event that we're trying to prevent with the idea that only 50 people are permitted to be in a league for sporting events. So you can have 100 people outside, you can have 50 people inside, but you can only have 50 people in a league.
I'm not aware of that, unless it came down through the governing bodies for the various sports. Like they may have, usually my recent experience with that is that they're working lock and step with government in terms of issuing their return to play guidelines. So if someone has put that in there, it might have been the governing body, like the Ontario Soccer Association or the Ontario Cycling Association or Softball Ontario, but I haven't come across that specifically.
Okay,
That's-
so
Yeah,
that, so, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead, please.
So I will add, I don't know who it is that actually posted this question, so I'll ask if they have any additional information about this circumstance that they're referring to. Maybe they could provide that. They did specify baseball leagues, but I don't know that that really clarifies it for you. But we were talking.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we were talking, I mean, we do have some groups that are definitely trying to create protocol around what they understand compliance to look like. So for example, in a restaurant industry, we have someone who's suggesting that their contact with customers be limited. So they're being told to go take the order, but don't go back until you bring their food, and don't go back until they're all done to take their dishes. So that there's very restricted access to the customer, and certainly in an in-dining experience, you're quite familiar with your service, your server coming back and asking you, is everything okay? Do you need anything more? And they're kind of getting the direction that they shouldn't do that, which is, again, they're trying to be compliant, they're trying to keep everybody safe, but is that really logical? So anyway, I don't know if you have any comment on what kind of protocol should take place inside a restaurant with regard to service?
I think part of it, going back, actually, and it's connected to this, the league. There was a comment about, that I read about leagues should contain no more than 50 participants, and players were not permitted to play against players outside of their league or group, so you weren't going to have interleague play kind of thing.
Right.
And the intent is to limit the contact, keep the interactions minimal. And I think why they went to the 50, they had to come up with a number, and it was less than 100, is because, once you're talking sports, you're almost always, as part of the activity, going to have some close interactions. And again, relating that back to the restaurant, the server, it's going to be an individual choice, I believe, for the operator. But if you can minimize the contact, the customers are going to understand if they don't quite get as frequent contact with the server. So it's kind of an operational thing, I think, as they go along. They're wearing masks. People are screened coming in, so they're healthy. The risk should be minimal. And that would just be one more step that they could take by minimizing contact. But I don't think it would be any hard and fast rules that say, you can't keep coming back to fill up the water or anything like that. But maybe the operator could take steps to put out a full jug of water at the beginning, as they often do anyway.
I would support that, what Andrew just said as well.
Okay. So now I have a very specific question where, again, I think what people have to understand is that these directives are placed out, that the directives are out there, there are the rules in place. How you follow them is kind of at your discretion. And if it gets reported, then you may have to identify why you weren't compliant to the letter. So in this particular situation, you've got someone who's coming in and entering a gym. Do they need to wear masks if the minute they walk in, the athletes walk from the door, wash their hands, go straight to the mat to wait for practice? As soon as they are done, they wash their hands and leave. They are physically distanced the entire time. So do they need to wear a mask while walking those few steps from the mats to the door? So a very specific environment.
Well, I think that would be covered under our mask directive, that people wear a mask in enclosed public places, unless where there's an exemption. So in that case, I would say yes, but if you read our FAQ and our media release on the mask directive, it also talks about having a policy and enforcing it in good faith. So there might be a reason why that person may not be wearing a mask. I can't think of one, but there might be instances where people are seen indoors where, there's a reason why they're not.
Yeah, the general requirement, yes, they should be wearing a mask when they're walking through the premises. But again, as I said before, at some point, they're not going to be wearing a mask while doing the actual strenuous activity or while they're dining, while they're eating or drinking. They're obviously not going to have the mask on then.
Right. And I would also say in this situation, it's a scheduled activity. So it would be a group coming at the same time, or it would be an assigned time. So it wouldn't necessarily be open public access. So there would be
I
like.
hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I still think the mask policy would cover. They're still in an indoor enclosed public space.
Right. Fair enough.
In a situation like that, Jill, give us a call and we can spend more time getting all the particulars, and we can answer questions and try to provide some clarification.
Okay, so then
As
I also
mentioned, we have a couple points of access. You can call our general COVID intake line, which is the option is on our main phone system. There's also call our main number and ask for press extension 677, which takes you to the inspection department. And also on social media, you can chat, send us a message and we'll chat back with you.
Okay, so that number is 966-5500, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so 613-966-5500. And for an inspector, then you do extension 667?
677.
677, very good. Okay, so we'll remind people of that number again. So I'm going to get a link here for the excerpt around that whole sporting thing, if you want some more clear direction on that. But there's another question about drive-in. Does there have to be a specific distance between vehicles? And I think that has been stated, but maybe you could tell us.
I think that's in the regulation.
Yep, 2 meters. It isn't.
Okay,
and
so
again, if people are doing the drive-in thing and they're in their vehicles, I think there's already been some complaints in other jurisdictions about people, once they're there, then they bring out their lawn chairs and sit outside their vehicles, and that should not be happening because suddenly people are closer than they should be.
Right, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that is in it's section 12 of the stage 3 regulation. It covers drive-in or drive-through cinemas performances. On the flip side of that, they can exceed the 100 person gathering if they meet all the parameters under that section.
Right, and actually that's another really good point, because we talked a little bit about the 50 for an inside gathering, but if a restaurant, for example, has capacity to put 100 people in and maintain 2 meters distance between the customers or have plexiglass barriers between them, they don't necessarily have to maintain that 50.
Correct. As you said, if there's a dining room that can accommodate more than 50 and social distancing between tables is achieved, or if there's a barrier between tables, the 50 can be exceeded, except, and going back to Andrew's comment about logic, unless there's a hired performer performing, singing or dancing, or performing brass or wind instruments. Sorry, take out the dancing. I think it's just singing or brass. Then only 50 people can be in attendance. And I think that is because that type of activity is seen as a higher risk, and therefore 50 people is what the recommendation from the Chief Medical Officer of Health was to the government.
Okay.
That's the other thing I should mention. Some of these recommendations are from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Williams. So in a lot of cases, there's good logic that I can see behind them. The odd one, like the fitting rooms, I'm left wondering, just as Andrew is, but for the most part, the government is acting on that advice.
Very good. So someone's asking for a little bit of clarification. If you have 100 guests at a function, you would be allowed to have 10 staff. And I think what you said before was, as long as the staff are kind of separate from the guests, then you can have the required number of staff in order to serve that group, so to speak.
Yeah, the staff are not factored into the 100. So you can
Right.
have as many staff as you need to carry out the event.
Right, yeah. So if the number is 10, then absolutely, you can have 10.
Yeah.
Just gonna see if there's, here's a good question for you, because I'm hoping you've got your crystal ball. And in all fairness, I think we're all really curious about some of the health and safety protocols that local schools may need to start following in September. Do you have any indication yet on what that might be?
Talking schools?
Schools, yeah.
I know we're meeting, we have a meeting planned tomorrow to meet with school reps. So yeah, there's work underway.
Okay, well,
Yeah, I
that's
think
good to. No, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was going to say the government announced that there could be 3 models in the fall, and they sort of gave boards of education the marching orders that they have to be able to be flexible and switch between models, I believe. But
Okay.
there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered as to, the defined details in each model. So we're meeting with the school boards regularly. We often meet with them in conjunction with Kingston Health Unit, because the Catholic board overlaps both areas. So we have a separate manager, Cheryl, who looks after that, Cheryl Fahar. So if you have any more detailed questions around schools, we can forward them on to her.
Okay, no, that's great. That was from Jane Gardner with the Quinte Ballet School, so that'll be, I know that they'll be interested. So the directive that was kind of coming out about the health piece, or the team group, was specifically that leagues must contain no more than 50 participants total. If participants in a league exceed 50, the league may divide into smaller groups of no more than 50. And then players are not yet permitted to play against players outside of their league or group. So yeah, it is a bit confusing, because even from the logic that you applied there, and which made some sense, that you certainly don't want interleague play, whatever. I guess it's just, yeah. Is it like a change?
I'll take a shot at that. I think the logic behind it is probably the cohorting logic. So when I first heard you pose the question, I thought they meant the entire number of players in the league. Like, let's take the Bea Quinte men's soccer league or women's soccer league. I thought you meant that you couldn't have more than 50 players. But what I think, hearing what you just read and what Andrew had also spoken to earlier, I think they're trying to cohort 50 people to play against each other. So you could have over 50 in the league, 100 or 150 players, but they don't want players to play outside of that 50 bubble. I think that's what they're trying to get at.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, effectively, you've kind of expanded your bubble by being engaged in an organization like that. And as much as the sport itself may allow for physical distancing, at some point you are going to come together, or closer together, perhaps.
And yeah, it's anticipating if we do have a problem, someone comes down with the illness, in terms of contact tracing, but at least you've got some limits there. You know, you haven't got interleague play and you've got somebody, you know, a lot of people to contact. So
Yeah.
it's just trying to be realistic in resources.
Yes. And when should the practice of when should the practice of recording names and numbers for contract tracing be applied? I know that restaurants are doing this, or should be at least. Maybe you could give me some more information.
Andrew and I had a conversation with Dr. Cataray when stage 3 was coming into effect, and I think it's a strong recommendation right now. We haven't issued a directive saying it's mandatory, but it's a good idea to get a name and phone number, and in case there is a positive case or potential exposure.
So for most of them, it's a strong recommendation, good advice. There are a couple of exceptions that it's a regulatory requirement. So a tour or guide service must do it, and a boat tour service must record the name and contact information of patrons.
And it's also in the hair salon regulation, right?
Oh yeah, and separate pre-COVID, it's under our personal service regulations that cover personal service settings like barbershops, tattoo places, that kind of stuff. They were required to record contact information. And then they relaxed that on the hair cutting places, did not have to do that.
Okay, so only some of them.
But,
okay.
You know, tattoo places and stuff, they had to do it by regulation, and that was pre-COVID.
Sure. No, that's true. And you might not have realized that the whole purpose of putting your name down for an appointment was actually to allow for some of that. So now all of a sudden it seems like it's new, but it really wasn't. There's a question about mask directives for model homes. And I know that if, from a real estate perspective, if you're going to show a house, the realtor has to fill out a full form. There's a whole directive around that. Are open houses allowed, I guess, in this situation?
Well, yeah, under the current regulation that just came in on last Friday, real estate agencies may have open house if they ensure that members of the public are separated by, can keep the separation of 2 meters, and in any event, they're not permitted to exceed 50 persons, which I have trouble imagining that's happening in an open house.
You'd be surprised. It's a pretty hot market here.
But anyway, it's spelled out in like one sentence, very clear in the regulation.
Okay, that you can, as long as they abide by all of their directives.
As long as they can keep 2 meters apart and they don't go over 50 persons.
Right, and they would be wearing masks as well in our area.
That's a good one. I'll have to go back and ask about that. To me, I see I see both. It could be covered under our mask directive, or it could not be. I can get back to you on that one. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I would say obviously it would be a good idea, because otherwise we're going to get complaints that we have to reply to. But yeah, I'm not sure if it's spelled out specifically.
So we both agree, it'd have to be a big mansion for 50 people
to be in it. Yeah. But, and then I guess the question also applied to model homes as well. But again, you're sitting in a situation where you are controlling access in a model home environment. Well, I guess, yeah, it does. It has kind of the appearance of an open house. So you could have, but you could just have people, only so many people in a time. They'd line up just as they would for a grocery store kind of thing. And then once they go into the enclosed space, then typically you'd have to have a mask.
I'm thinking maybe quibbling here, but I think a model home might be slightly different. It might be considered an enclosed public space. But once you're dealing with someone's private home for sale, that's a bit, that's maybe not the public setting there.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll find out if we get a good. We'll find out if that really works. The other thing. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes left, so I'll ask one last little question here. If we're planning to rent a theater for a performance, will the limit of 50 persons be mandatory for those performances in venues and physical distancing requirements be required? Are things like plexiglass barriers required to be installed between performers and the audience?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so we have to have 50 people. Physical distancing is required, and plexiglass. That's going to be a big piece of plexiglass.
Yeah, I think it just has to protect the audience from the singers and brass or wind instruments. And I'd have to look up what is considered one of those because I'm not very musical. But they must be, the public spectators must be separated from singers and players of brass and wind instruments by plexiglass or other impermeable barrier. So just reading, there's a whole section on performing arts in the stage 3 regulation.
Okay. So if the performance isn't necessarily singing or trumpet players, for example, if it's dance, that's an interesting approach. Now, how would they see that differently?
Good question. The regulation says concerts, artistic events, theatrical performances, or other performances. So it's kind of it's specific in those 3 or 4 areas, but also has kind of generic wording. If someone is thinking of doing this, give us a call and we'll work you through it.
Okay.
I'm looking at it that they've again looking for logic that the singers and the brass or wind instrument is because they're blowing hard, forcefully expelling air. But if you just have a band, a couple of people playing guitar or piano player, just background music kind of thing, then I'm not so sure that you would need the plexiglass separation. I think all you would be looking at is keeping the 2-meter separation.
Right. So you just don't have anyone in the first 2 rows or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can work if someone is thinking about this, like we've had in the last few weeks, quite a few proposals come through, and we've been reviewing them, and we will get back to the proponents very quickly to let them know what we think or how we interpret the regulations.
Okay. No, that's fantastic. So I guess for everybody who's on the line, we have a couple minutes left. I will say thank you so much for everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Roberto and Andrew. It's always a pleasure, in spite of the fact that we have challenging conversations and I'm not always very nice to you. I do appreciate that you continue to support us through these very honest and direct conversations, because it's a challenging time, and I don't think we maybe have appreciated how challenging it is for you as well. So thank you. And the number people should reach out to is 613-966-5500. And if they want an inspector, it's extension 677.
Yeah. Things are shifting quite quickly, but we're here to help out as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. And we will always, and if anybody's interested in following links to this information, at the BellevilleChamber.ca website, we have a COVID-19 page, and under local resources, we'll have links to the health unit's information there. And I'll forward any questions that I get from here on to you, and then you can maybe give me some answers if I get them.
Definitely, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, guys. Thanks everyone for joining us. And we have the media on the line, so if they want to stay here for a little bit longer, we'll let them do so. If you don't mind hanging on for a minute, Roberto and Andrew.
We'll stay on the line. We halfway through our call, we got notification that our room is booked for something else, so we may have to leave and maybe regroup in a different room.
Okay, so I'll ask, yeah, go ahead. If if any of the media has a question, just raise your hand, or here, I'll allow them to talk. That's Bill Glisky.
I think Derek had to get off. He was on,
Okay,
so I
And,
think.
and I think I got everything I need, Jill, so we'll let those guys get back to the important work they're doing.
okay, that's fantastic. Okay, thanks again, Roberto and Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.